Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Aaron Clifford, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Binary Fountain. He brings more than 15 years of experience in the healthcare industry. In this role, he leads all the marketing functions, including brand strategy, demand generation, product marketing, and customer advocacy services. We're going to be talking about the importance of really understand what customers are saying about your brand, not just sort of social media, but all the feedback that you might be able to get, because that's what I think that's what Binary Fountain does. But we're also going to be talking about sort of what do you do in the first 6 months of your job as a CMO, and I think that's a really interesting place to sort of frame the show. So, welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Great to be here, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Well, my pleasure. And we had a nice preamble here, and I want to just sort of Binary Fountain. Where did that name come from?
It's interesting. That was one of the first questions I asked. Where did this name come from? And it all started out with a group of developers were sitting around going, we need a name. They had started to get some business, and they're like, well, we're in tech, but we want to sort of show that there's a life-giving sort of essence of what we're doing here.
Okay. So, all right. Well, you know what? It's just a bunch of nerds sitting around trying to come up with a name is really what you're saying.
That's pretty much it.
All right, fine.
I think that's pretty much it.
All right.
Something real inspirational.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So I expect to see water fountains in the lobby if I ever visit you with little pieces of code flying out.
We'll make that happen.
All right, good. Yeah, let's get that going. I want to see fountains, baby. I love fountains. So, just to make sure that folks understand what we're talking about here, because I know you guys are you're in healthcare and you help brands sort of listen to conversations. And in fact, you use Binary Fountain when you were at HCA. Talk a little bit about what you guys do and give a real world example of how this sort of form of listening resulted in a better customer experience.
Sure. So while I was at my previous employer, HCA, which is a large hospital healthcare company, I was responsible for, at the time, the physician practices and clinics in their social media strategy, their web strategy, and ultimately, I started to notice that there were reviews on our physicians, and there were a lot of them. So I had every summer we would get these interns. It would be like the interns are descending upon us. And I had asked for 3 of them. And so their task was to go through all of the Google My Business pages, and they had the list of like 2,500 physicians. And I asked them to get all the reviews, copy and paste them.
They must have loved you for that.
Oh man. I caught them watching Netflix a few times.
Okay, fine.
Doing some other activities. Ultimately, though, what was revealed in those, and this was 2 summers in a row, and we had an increase of reviews from one summer to the next of 175% in reviews. And I ultimately realized I was not going to be able to keep, and that was just on one platform. I wasn't going to keep this going every summer. I needed to have more real-time and up-to-date, and then better sentiment analysis of the comments that were being left. Ultimately, we found this one really negative comment, and it was for a clinic, and the patient said, "This office and this physician is responsible for my baby dying."
Ugh.
And how do you respond to that? It's just so tough. There's no way to prove it, but that's out there. And we found that review was out there for 2 years.
Yikes.
So ultimately, I decided we needed technology to solve the problem. And that's where I found Binary. We did an extensive RFP process where we evaluated 8 vendors. We piloted simultaneous between Binary Fountain and the competitor for about 6 months. and did an extensive review of the reporting, and ultimately chose binary. So that's how I got into know binary Fountain.
Let me stop you there for a second, because I think it's really
sure.
interesting that you actually tested both platforms, two competitive platforms. I just want to call that out because a lot of brands don't do that when they're bringing on new technology partners. And so the other obvious thing is that binary must have won that pretty clearly, or not only would you not bought them, but you probably wouldn't have gone to the company.
Right. Exactly. And that was, one of the things, large enterprise, we had 14 divisions, 170 hospitals, 800 clinics. Oftentimes at enterprise level and corporate level, you're going to have to end up selling the product to all the divisions, so to speak, for adoption. And you want to make sure that they have confidence in your decision. And oftentimes that means you're piloting two different platforms and you're getting in depth, and you can answer the questions that they may have between the two. And then also just questions they haven't thought of, and you're educating and informing them. The confidence level goes up and adoption rates go a lot higher than if you were just we just chose this one because it looks cool.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So, putting it as a pilot, particularly for a hospital, particularly as someone who's bringing sort of marketing in a world that is kind of foreign. I mean, let's face it, healthcare is not about, it's not a marketing driven industry, or doesn't see it that way. So there's probably some suspicion in the organization, and so prove it. And so a pilot makes a lot of sense. And so you do the pilot, and obviously it was enough to inspire you to join the company 6 months ago. Let's get right to your first 6 months. What did you do the first 3 months on the job at Binary?
One of the first things I did was I went to every department and I asked them, why do you work here? What inspires you to work here? I'm big on mission and values and understanding the why behind the what, and why they chose the position. So I went in and I asked the customer success group, the development team, the sales team, the account management team, why do you work here? And it was important to me. So messaging and overall vibe of the company and brand would be known, and that we can surface some of those questions. And so in some of that, it was, some of it, quite frankly, is, it's a good job,
Yeah, it's
Bill. I can work from home every once in a while.
Right, and pays my mortgage. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So were there
kind of a cool company.
But what were the surprises that you found?
Surprises were, that how in our technology we're enabling health systems. We're also in multifamily as well, but we're enabling health systems to do better and to improve the patient experience. So there's surveys that are done in healthcare, and there's, various forms of feedback, but ultimately what they felt is like, we really believe that we're helping surface some of the complaints and some of the concerns and some of the awesome stories too, of people who are at their most vulnerable moments in time where their families are. And we're surfacing those to healthcare so they can better address them. And so those were some of the things that I heard. And then also just that, ultimately transparency. We're sort of in that age right now, right? We're, let's just put it out there. Let's just be honest and transparent, and be honest with ourselves as a company, how we're doing, be honest with our employees of how we're doing. And so there was we have a younger group, and millennials, I'm not really big into all the generational stuff. I think there's a lot of stereotypes, but there is a sense of just give me the brass tacks. Just tell me, just be transparent with me. And our company's kind of in that vein. And those are some of the stories that I heard emerge. And, they also, another surprise to me was the sense, especially on the customer success team, where they took their clients, and they really felt like they were a part of that health system working for them, because they do a lot of close work. And so it wasn't just client, I'm getting called again type thing.
Right.
I had experienced that from being on the client side, but I wasn't sure. I had everybody on the client success team. So anyway, those are some of the things, but it's a mixed bag, right?
Right. So you do the listening. You do the listening. You hear some good things. You hear some bad things. Okay. What was step number 2?
Step number 2 was to then sort of look at the existing messaging that we had been putting out to our potential customers and seeing if that theme and those stories were being conveyed. So I did an extensive review of the collateral, asked a lot of questions about, who was the target, what were you trying to accomplish to this, and ultimately doing a in-depth persona development, because we hadn't done it. It was very loosely done. And ultimately I was wanting to connect those stories and the vibe and everything else to what were the personas and would they even care? And does it matter? And does it solve any problems for them? And so it was, in healthcare, there are so many different, everybody in a lot of industries, but there are a lot of sensitivities around this space and reviews. And so you have to communicate in a way that it's not punitive to the client and to the potential client, because physicians, you come and you give them a negative review, or you let them know things that are being said about them or the health system, and it's not all that warm and fuzzy, right? But you have to solve a problem with them and convey it in a way that you are solving a problem and you're inspiring them to take action and not just ignore it's just an angry patient or something like that.
And so you're constantly in that position where you're saying, I'm not telling you that your baby is ugly, but the term, it sort of seems like your baby's kind of ugly and you better fix it.
Yeah.
It needs a whole new bedside manner or whatever. And that's a little tricky, but ultimately not necessarily the doctor who's the one who's being reviewed, but the administrators of the hospital must see this and go, wait, customer experience matters. Wait, we're going to lose business to somebody else. This is fundamental to their ability to grow their business.
Right. Well, and it's a big part of the brand management as well. You are not what you say you are. You are what others say you are. That's your brand. And it's surfacing those items to the health system and to the physicians. And quite frankly, a lot of physicians, their reviews, it's really not about them. It's about everything surrounding it, right? It's the health insurance, it's billing, it's everything else.
Right.
So, in terms of this step 2 is looking at and going through and, all right, let's start a new sort of content approach that's messaging and is meaningful to our prospective buyers and to our current customers, and that we're educating and sort of helping fill in the gap. So that was the second step.
Okay, so let's pause for a second because we need to take a break because we're way past our break time. And when we come back, we'll talk about execution and some of the sort of surprises and things that happened that that you weren't expecting. So we'll be right back. Hey, it's Drew. I have a question for you, the audience. How good is your content? We all believe in content marketing, but is your content good enough for you to share it with the CEO and want him to share it with his peers? Is it good enough for your salespeople to share with their prospects? Heck, is it good enough for you to share it with your mom? If the answer to all of those questions was no, well, it's not that good, and you're also celebrating things like National Donut Day, it's probably a good idea to do a content audit. And I know just the person to help you out with that. Text content audit to 917-679-8852. That's actually my cell phone. And we can talk about how to get your content to be world class and do all the things that you know it should be able to do. So you can text content audit to 917-679-8852. And let's figure out together how to get your content to cut through. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Aaron Clifford, the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Binary Fountain. We've been talking about customer reviews and managing these things, which is the business of Binary Fountain. But we're really talking about how do you market a service to large companies? And so Aaron went on a listening tour and then looked at all the messaging. And so now let's talk about execution. What did you do at first, and then sort of what were some of the lessons that you learned that helped you change your approach?
Sure. So we definitely got more disciplined about putting out content, and whether that was in form of ebook or blogging, email distribution, we got more disciplined about it. But then we took those personas and we decided let's see what we can churn up from a search engine marketing perspective and social ads, and see if we can get this message in front of the right people. Which was, my background at HCAs, we did a lot of different digital marketing initiatives, and the targeting worked really well in that B2C space. We're still in the process of discovering, well, what's the right approach and how do you get this in front of the right people? Even when you're buying ads that are targeted to the right people, we have all kinds of information and we know what they're searching on, but still, it's a little weak. So we've kind of floundered around on that one a little bit, just to be honest.
I love
we've
that.
Not had the most success.
So wait,
because what I thought it was going to be.
Well, and it's tricky. I mean, first of all, these are sort of long decision cycles. It's hard to measure. Someone who decides to hire your company, it could take them 6 to 18 months to first they have to recognize the problem, right? Because a lot of them are in denial. I imagine you're not competing with another service most of the time. Initially, you're competing with the notion of, we need to have some kind of reputation management, listening program in place. And so you have to educate them, and that takes time, and they have to be ready, and they have to realize that they have a problem. Right. I totally get that. So, we were talking earlier. So one of the things that sort of surprised you was that things like, I guess, events worked a lot better than you expected. And let's talk about that.
Right. And so we looked at our personas and messaging and the content, and they had some success. Binary had some success in the webinars in the past. And so with this new sort of rigor and who we're going to be approaching, and who we needed to get out in front of, so let's invest a lot more in the webinars, and then also just in our presence at some of the conferences. But our webinars in particular, getting the right topics and the right individuals to join us, those were informed by all of the work that we did in the listening tour and the content generation and personas. And ultimately, we had done 2 webinars, and those have been extremely, extremely helpful. And I think it's to the point you made, Drew, in terms of that education piece. We have, it's a competitive landscape. We definitely have our competitors, but we're often competing against the lack of knowledge in this space and the impact that this space is having on the business. And so we have to overcome that. And so the webinars and events have proved out to generate a lot more leads. We've not abandoned digital or any other approach. We're doing them concurrently, but as far as in focus and then also impact on our future budgets, we're investing a lot more in the webinar event space, and then also into our presence at conferences.
So let's just real quick from if you had to do, looking at the webinars and what worked and what didn't, what would be, say, 2 things that you could suggest to other marketers to make sure that their webinars are more effective?
I would definitely have, if you have a customer that you have a good relationship with and that is well respected in the industry, ask them to participate with you and do a joint webinar with you. You'd be surprised at times. You don't need the senior vice president of that particular company. You don't need even the director. You just need somebody who wants to share and teach and talk about how they're using their product or service, and that's passionate about the space. And you would be shocked to see the response. The approach we took we had a really well-respected individual from one of our clients present with us, and she's a manager, had been in the space, kind of helped grow the program at our customers' place of business, and it was just fabulous. The response was just tremendous. So reach out and ask. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage, right? You're not sure if someone's going to say no, and you have to be, you have to accept the no's. Asking a client, hey, will you participate with this? Because, the client doesn't want to hear from the vendor, because the vendor's always going to tell you it's going to be biased, right?
Right.
But if you have a client there, they're going to be honest about, the implementation and how they're using the product and the problems they've solved, because the participants and those that are attending the webinar are going to take that information back. They're going to go and build their own business case, make the case, and they're going to point to the well-respected client and say, so-and-so did this program and they had these results. We need to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think what you're saying is really important. And I got to say that, on one hand, you may think it takes courage to ask the customer to do it, but first of all, if they're not happy enough with you to do a webinar with you, then there's probably an issue. So you better look at your company there. Two, it's good for their brand. And most, a lot of companies are increasingly realize, wait, it's good for us to be out there. It's a way of demonstrating, particularly in your category, where a customer is saying, hey, we're really listening and we're really trying to improve our customer experience. That's a good message in the healthcare industry. It's not about sort of exposing any, hey, this is our secret. It's about, sort of getting out there and helping that brand, your customer, sort of look good in the marketplace. So, I think you're absolutely right. That's a great way to do it. I just want to get to events real quick, as we come to a close on this segment. But was there anything that you did in the events that, you took that helped you, get more people to bang on your booth or something? What was your secret to making those work?
We had we enlisted a partner to distribute and get in front of the right distribution list. So we made an investment, and it wasn't just organic and the list of folks that we had. So we used another organization to help us get the word out. And that was very successful. That helped us get a lot more registrants, as well as just sending it out to the distribution list of the emails that we had collected. I'll say though, just a lessons learned, we started that process a little too late. While we had a great, we were very pleased with our results. At the same time, we said, you know what? We could have started this about 3 weeks earlier. And so I would just, if I were advising somebody, say, when are you going to do the webinar? All right. When do you think you should start marketing it? All right. Now add 3 weeks and do some additional just build up to it and drip marketing around it. So we needed to do a little bit of that and a little more. We will do that in the future, but definitely enlisting the right partner to get in front of the right people is valuable from a promotion standpoint. You may only be able to do so much with the list and the contacts that you have.
Yeah.
So use those services.
I would add to that. I mean, the first sort of most important point, in my opinion, of what you just said was, you have to market the marketing. The webinar is a marketing opportunity, but you have to market that. One of the tricky and sort of unfortunate things with webinars when they're free is you have to count on a certain number of attrition, and 50% is not unusual, sometimes higher than that. So if you want 100 attendees at your webinar, you better have 200, 250 registrants. And so in order to do that, you need to cast a pretty broad net. So I love the fact that you hired, you got a mailing list or somebody else a media partner that would get this fact that you were having this webinar out there to make the most of that. I'm curious, so you got all these people to attend the webinar. What was the sort of follow up after the webinar to make sure that you sort of continued that conversation with those prospects?
So of course we recorded the webinar, but then we took out the highlight reel, so to speak, and offered that to the participants and those who had signed up, even those who were unable to attend. and we kind of sliced it up and made it a little bit shorter and sent that out and then sent additional information. So it was a value add. We weren't just like, hey, buy from us now, buy from us. Like, here's a little bit more, here's a little bit more condensed, and trying to serve those that took the time to even sign up. And the open rate and the view rate on those have been very good.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, by the way. I don't think a lot of webinars do that, where you sort of take the greatest hits and send it to the people. First of all, what's really smart about that, again, is because of the attrition, the people who signed up for it did mean to do it, just something happened in their day. So to send a highlight reel, because it's hard to get someone to watch a webinar after the fact. It is, right? There's something about seeing it live and then being able to ask the question. And so creating a sort of digested version makes a lot of sense. And you're still providing value, which is so important. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're just going to talk about the biggest risk that Aaron took in his career, or at least at his last job. So we'll be right back. Hey, it's Drew. I wanted to use this break to ask you a single question. Are you a courageous marketer? Do you have the courage to go to your board of directors and say, marketing could drive the growth of this company? We just need 3 times the budget. Do you have the courage to take the big idea that you already have and extend it internally and externally through influencers, through the media, through all of your content? If you're a courageous marketer but aren't sure how to roadmap all of this, I have a big idea for you. It's called Renegade Thinking. It's a program that we've developed and work with exclusively for B2B marketers, generally at large companies. And I want to give you my cell phone, 917-679-8852. Just text Renegade Thinking to 917-679-8852. And we can talk about how you can cut through. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Aaron Clifford, the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Binary Fountain. And in our pre-webinar call, we talked about a challenge that you faced when you were in your last job. Talk a little bit about the challenge and how you sort of went about tackling it, and it sounded like a pretty interesting and kind of risky move you did.
So in my previous company, I was responsible for the websites, and we had about 850 websites that ranged from hospitals, clinics, to surgery centers, and then to corporate sites. We had 14 divisions, and one of the divisions they decided that they wanted to do something a little bit different from a design perspective had about 90 of those websites. And so they put out an RFP to a number of agencies and consulting companies. And I asked if I could respond as an internal department to that RFP. So they kind of chuckled like, well, all right, you can. And ultimately we responded just like we were an agency, but we were internal. And we were chosen. Now, I tell people, like, it may have been chosen because we were free. Like, that helped us out a lot.
That's really an unfair. I feel really bad for those agencies that pitch that business. That's an unfair advantage. Wait, we'll do it for nothing.
I know it. But you know what it did though was it solidified that the divisions wanted to be a part of bringing a unifying technology and approach to the digital space, and they were willing to participate. So we ended up inviting all 14 divisions to a 2-day rapid design session, and we ended up having 10 divisions represented there. Marketing VPs and digital folks had about 40 folks at this design session, and paper prototype, got everybody involved in the process to where their fingerprints were on it. And we ended up coming up with the one design that replaced over 4,500 different templates.
Wow.
And it led to a very significant business case. And we added additional FTEs, full-time employees, to the organization that was desperately needed for web. And it really made a big impact and reduced the number of support hours, and just really, it made vast improvements. It took us from where we were lagging behind competition to surpassing them in terms of functionality. And then just the scale, having 900 sites, it was just a lot more simple to support. So that was probably the biggest risk, 'cause,
what made you think you pull it off? I mean, because it's one thing to say, yeah, hey, well, we can do this. What made you think and have the confidence that your team or that you could sort of do what all these external agencies with all these resources could do?
The team, our team, and so I had the web development group and the account management, project managers, but then the other group, the designers, were actually in a different department. We partnered. Joe Jacobellis I had enormous confidence in the design and in the rapid design sessions and facilitating this. I knew that we could go toe to toe with an agency. So I had that confidence in the team. By myself, I would have been like, oh man, there's no way.
Right.
Go to the agency. Yeah, cool. I'll participate. But I knew the team could do it. I'd seen them work hard, and we had a talented group of folks. So I knew it. And I knew too that the organization wanted more unity and a unified approach. They didn't want to make just a bunch of other Frankensteins out there. And so it was in the spirit of that approach.
And I think that's interesting. And so I talk a lot about the need for CMOs to take risks. Obviously, we believe in that pretty strongly here. Part of it is that CMOs don't have that long time in the job necessarily. So if you don't take a big swing, and even if you miss, at least you have a good story to tell. And so many people sort of do their jobs without having any kind of coming out of it without a story. But I think the interesting part of your feeling you could take the risk, because, by the way, a lot of folks wouldn't have made that decision that you did because it's easier to bring in an outside service and then blame them if it doesn't work out, right? You took it upon yourself to say, hey, we can do this. We can do it better than they are. And you're totally on the line at that point. I mean, you really put yourself out there. So, but you had the confidence because of the foundation of the team that you had behind you, and you knew it. And so I think that's really important. We're not talking on this show and any of the interviews we do where we talk about the risks. They're smart risks based on some feeling that more than just a little bit of intuition that you're going to be able to pull it off and execute it as you plan. So I think this has been a really interesting and focused conversation. I'm wondering if there's any sort of, if you look back at your career, if there's one or two marketing lessons that you've learned that you really think would help other chief marketing officers do their jobs better.
Yeah, I would say being in tune with your customer base. So while I was at my previous position, hearing the struggles and empathizing, I probably would summarize it with empathy, right? Not only for those that are trying to execute the business, but then empathy for your customers and potential customers and solving their problems is probably the biggest impact that I've had by paying attention that I've had in my career to this point. So it's really, when I was in the hospital system, it was, all right, I want to understand that patient, and there's so many different patients, but they're struggling and they're looking for a solution and they're wanting to come, they're needing some help, and they're starting online. We know that from their searches. The percentage of people who start a search when they're healthcare problems, they start online with symptoms. And I want to make sure that when they come to our website, that they find a solution in the right direction, and we don't confuse them and make it more difficult at their most vulnerable time. So it's empathy.
I love that. And I think that's a great place. I'm going to have somewhat of a longer wrap up than I've had in a couple of episodes, but there's so many interesting things that came out of this. First, I want to just talk about the first 6 months on the job. If you're a chief marketing officer, I love, and we've talked about that a lot in over the various shows, the listening tour, literally going out and making sure that before you make any decisions that you've understood what's going on. Two, reviewing everything that's been done in the past. Just because it's been done in the past doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it's really important that you have that history and the grounding and the thinking behind that. I thought it was interesting that you talked a lot about personas. People have talked a lot about personas on this show. I would refer you back to the episode with Jackson Jay from Box, because he very interestingly talked about naming your personas in a very special way, so that it brings it to life. So when the rest of the marketing and organization wants to talk about these folks, they can do so really in a smart and, I'm going to say, creative and inspiring way. So that's personas. And then lastly, we talked about testing and learning in the sense that you start with these service companies that have B2B companies that have a very specific target audience. And you would think that, wow, we've got their email addresses, we've got their domains, that we could invest all our dollars in digital media because that seems so efficient. And through a process of testing and learning, what Aaron talked about was that it turned out, webinars, which add a lot of value, were really effective. And here's my thought for all of you in the service world is that it really helps if you're selling a service that is relatively new. You may want to think about owning the problem before you talk about yourself. And I'm going to go back to the years when Listerine was a relatively new product. They invented something called halitosis. It was the problem that they solved. And that notion of creating the problem that you solve, and if you do it in a way, and what a webinar allows you to do, say, here's the problem, here's a customer who's in the webinar, who's telling about a problem and how this solution came to fix it, is a really interesting way. So lessons learned on the webinar is get a great guest. It doesn't have to be a senior person. Make sure it's a client. And if you can't get clients, you have a bigger problem. Promote the heck out of it. It sounded like you got a partner to promote it far and wide. You could have used a little bit more time. And it doesn't end with the webinar. The webinar creates all sorts of good content for you to slice and dice, to create a highlight reel, as Aaron described it, to put together something that continues to add value, not just for the attendees, but the folks afterward. I would also say that there's probably 4 or 5 other pieces of content that could come out of a good webinar and set you up for the next one. And so one of the things that we encourage our clients for is think of webinars as a series, think of webinars as part of a larger story that holds everything together. And I think that's all I got for you today. But Aaron, this was a really interesting, and I so appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Drew. It's a huge honor to be on your show, and appreciate what you're doing and love the guests that you have on. I'm humbled that I was asked to participate, but thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. And so for all you listeners, I want to thank you, as always, for listening to the show. I'm going to encourage you again to subscribe and share and give us feedback. You know how to do that. I've given you my cell phone number, so give us some feedback. And then until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.